Hello everyone. I am here to talk to you about my cultural artifact. My cultural artifact is a song called Johnny Be Good by an artist named Chuck Berry that came out in 1958. I'm using this cultural artifact in relation to music, rock and roll, bands in general, and just the progression of music over the last 60, 70 years since the release of this song. I think it's important first to talk about what a cultural artifact to me in this situation is. And that first to me is what represents that time frame and what music was like at the time. How music has progressed since then can be a lot easier to see when looking at that compared to all this that comes after. So with rock and roll and rock in general, as a general genre, it's so broad at this point because of all these different ways it has branched since then. And I think that it starts with just about with this song. So in 1958, and prior to this, music, it wasn't very common to have an electric guitar with a high energy rock sound similar to what we hear in this song. That wasn't as common. That wasn't seen as often. So Chuck Berry, he brought this energy that hadn't been seen before, an energy that was rock. This is the only way you could describe it, is rock and roll. And it led on to a lot of other great people after him. Obviously Elvis Presley, the Beatles in the 60s, even late 50s, and then eventually leading on to create everything else that we know that is music. Now rock now has a bit of a different meaning. Rock and roll is not as common of a term that you're going to hear like you did at this time. Right? Rock and roll refers to more classic rock, 60s and below, to most people, at least to my ears, as, I listen to mostly genres that have kind of evolved since that point. I see that as the base, as the beginning of the tree. So we're looking at this cultural artifact, we're looking back at the past, we're looking at the beginning of this tree and the way it has expanded in this culture. First, I think it's important to note the energy that was present in this song and this type of music that Chuck Berry had released and began to foster and create this sound that he had created. It was very high energy. The guitar tone that you're hearing came from an electric guitar, which even then still was not as common to hear. It's like you don't have bands like you do now, which still a lot of hip hop and R&B is taking over, and pop and EDM of course, but still bands are very prevalent, and bands are still a very common and important part of music today. So this basically led them to create this high energy sound with a guitar that had a crunch on it. And this was new. Hadn't been introduced before. Distortion is what we call it. I play guitar, and so that's why this has a lot of relevance to me in my culture. I'm in a band right now. I make music, and this has a lot of importance to me because of that. Because a lot of the music that I listen to and that I'm creating has evolved from this time. So as you have this crunch sound, which is already very common now, that's evolving from Chuck Berry, you kind of start to drift into sounds like, okay, you got the Beatles coming in here and kind of adding, more poppy, more high energy. Some of their songs, you can look at them and say, wow, this might even be very early forms of metal. You might be able to say that. Very early song like a Helter Skelter by the Beatles. People have made arguments about that song. Still, even then, it's just inspiration leading to more. Then you have bands like the Ramones taking on this type of sound of crunch on guitar and turning into something different. Turning into something we haven't heard before. It's not rock. And metal isn't even a thing yet. It's not metal. What is this sound? It's punk. This punk sound, this high energy, these fast chords, they play so fast. And it's a new sound that we haven't heard before, which wouldn't be possible without this cultural artifact that we are looking at. We are looking back in the past with. Chuck Berry, he started a wave. He started the ripple to become what was going to become, music as we have it today, to branch off and create thousands of genres. You just, like, every genre now has a subgenre. but it really just started with rock. That's why I think that this song is so significant. Some people might recognize this song from Back to the Future. It had a lot of pop culture relevance in that movie. There's a scene where the main character is on stage and, he ends up playing the guitar and he plays that solo from that song. And just that solo has a lot of significance to a lot of people in pop culture and a lot of rock. A lot of people, when they first want to learn guitar, they're like, I want to learn Johnny Be Good, Chuck Berry. It's a classic song. And it's basically built everything that we have today. Now, while that song may not be popular now, which is actually even a whole other topic in its own that I find very interesting, because what has created all this music now is now seen as almost boring. To me, it's like, I can dabble with the song, but I don't go to listen to that because there's more music that has been more developed. It's way past that. And so examining that artifact from the past, it's like, this was bringing on emotions of energy and power and making you dance and move at the time that had never been seen before. To some people, it was even too much. And you look back at it now, it's like, okay. Touching back on the subject with the Ramones, the rise of punk, and the Beatles, and creating these crunchy sounds with the guitars leading into other music, then you have bands like Black Sabbath. Black Sabbath was a very early pioneer in metal. Black Sabbath created some of the sounds that have evolved, have evolved so much. Metal's its own whole world. There's a million subgenres of metal. But it all started with Black Sabbath. And Black Sabbath just created a sound that was dark. They used that power and the energy and the distortion from the guitar, and they turned that up. They took more distortion. They just kept making it more distorted. And it got more powerful, and it got heavier. And it all started with that. Sure, you might be able to make an argument. Came from something else. Came from a different song that rose at the time. There are a lot of songs similar in that genre. But I think that this is the most culturally significant one. One, because of its pop culture influence in Back to the Future, and maybe that has a little bit of bias to myself. But I think the general idea is there. That with that music that was being created at that time, what that had morphed into, it has created a whole entire world that Chuck Berry, he could not see that coming. He had no idea. It's pretty incredible just looking at that and examining how the culture has evolved, how the music and expression has evolved since then. It's incredible. It really is incredible. I could touch into it a lot more, but I think this is the main points I was really wanting to touch on today, was basically just the influence that this has to everything that has come after it. Because there wasn't a whole lot before this that looked similar to that, to this rock and roll sound, that branched into so much more. There really wasn't much before that you could compare it to. So the growth of music after this song, in that time frame of 1958 to even 1965, the growth of music was exponential. Then you get to the late 60s, you have the Ramones. It's just, in that 10 years, and then from there, that's where you can see in our music culture just about the most growth that we've seen, from what I've seen. So that is what I wanted to share about today. I just, Johnny Be Good by Chuck Berry. It's a good song. I highly recommend you check it out. It's you can definitely pick out a lot of musical elements to the playing that have shifted everything that came after it. So that's my piece.